Israel's two-week bombardment of Gaza has come at a heavy cost for hundreds of thousands of civilians. But the journalists and reporters covering the carnage have also come under fire. Since October 7, when the hostilities broke out, more than 21 journalists have been killed, with the overwhelming majority dying in Israeli airstrikes. Countless others have also been injured. But those casualties are nothing new when it comes to reporting on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Let's take a look at this report.
In the decades-long Israeli-Palestinian conflict, dozens of journalists have lost their lives providing coverage. Since the conflict in Gaza started on October 7th, at least 17 Palestinian journalists have been reportedly killed by Israeli airstrikes. One journalist also lost his life during an Israeli attack on southern Lebanon. And with the conflict in Gaza raging with no end in sight, that number is likely to rise. Since 2000, at least 38 journalists have been reportedly killed during Israeli operations. According to the Geneva Conventions, journalists engaged in dangerous professional missions in areas of armed conflict shall be considered as civilians and be protected as such. A case that sparked global outrage is that of Al Jazeera reporter Shireen Abu Akleh, who was killed by Israeli forces last year. The Israeli army initially blamed the killing on the Palestinian side, but months later admitted it may have been a misfire from an Israeli soldier. Rights groups rejected the conclusion, citing Israel's spotty record in investigating the killing of journalists. When asked about the recent killing of a journalist in southern Lebanon, an Israeli military official said,
"The Reuters event. We are still looking into it. I'm looking at the footage and we will come out with an answer when we are ready. A tragic event."
According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, Israel has never put a soldier on trial for an intentional or unintentional killing of a journalist. Rights groups are calling for Israel to be held more accountable in the deaths of journalists.
And to further discuss the hardship of reporting on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, joining me now from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank is Osama Nazzal. He's a journalist at Palestine International Broadcast, and from Birmingham, the UK, Kamel Hawwash is a founding member of the British Palestinian Committee. Warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. Osama, since October 7th, more than 20 journalists have been killed, mostly during Israeli airstrikes. What could you tell us about the current situation?
Yeah, the situation is very dangerous. It's very precarious. No security, no safety, no peace. And the Israeli occupation forces don't discriminate between journalists, fighters and civilians, as if all are targets for the Israeli military forces, whether for the war jets or for the shellings by the Israeli tanks. As you mentioned in your introduction, 21 Palestinian journalists were killed in the Gaza Strip, and also the Lebanese journalists in northern occupied Palestine. Yeah. So we are about a very serious condition where safety is missing.
So, Kamel, how is climate in Gaza and the occupied West Bank different than the previous years when it comes to the safety of journalists? And what have you been hearing?
Well, Israel has a long track record of targeting journalists. Everyone will remember Shireen Abu Akleh in the West Bank, who was killed last year. There was also Yusuf Murtaja, who was killed in 2018 at the Gaza fence during the marches of return. They're clearly labeled, wear helmets and so on to show that they are journalists, but Israel doesn't care. In the case of Gaza, there's no doubt that what Israel wants to do is to hide the crimes that it is committing, and therefore, whether it's first of all medical teams have been targeted, but also those who are reporting on the targeting of medical teams and civilians. In this case, also Israel has made it clear it is not looking for accuracy, but for destruction, and that will include journalists.
So, Osama, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, a nonprofit that advocates for the safety of journalists, says Israel has yet to, as Kamel mentioned, convict one of its soldiers for the killing of a journalist. Does this surprise you?
Really, we can talk, if we talk about the situation now, we are talking about the situation of chaos, okay? And there are no rules, there are no principles followed. So everything is expected at the moment, as the Israeli soldiers and the Israeli military forces are losing their reason, really, and they are acting as if everything in front of them is an object to be targeted. So it is really unimaginable, especially when we are talking about forces that are losing control over themselves of the situation on the ground.
So, Kamel, what do you make of the international community as well as the international journalism organizations' response to the killing of journalists in the conflict-stricken regions, but especially in the Middle East? I mean, how efficient have they been so far?
There isn't enough calling out of Israel's crimes at all levels and to all the civilians in Gaza, including the journalists. So I think there's a real need for journalists' unions across the world, particularly, to stand with their Palestinian brothers and sisters who are reporting under the most atrocious and difficult conditions. I genuinely can't understand how they continue to do what they do so brilliantly and with the calmness that they are bringing to this, actually telling us what they see, which is the truth, rather than what Israel fabricates, which is hidden because we don't see any evidence. The evidence is there for all to see about the destruction, but also this complete free hand to target whoever they want. And of course, it is because they enjoy impunity as a state, as a government from the world, where even the Prime Minister of Britain was there yesterday and he said he wanted Israel to win, but it seems at any cost.
So, Osama, what would you say, have Western media outlets been too silent on the treatment of journalists covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
The Western media is not only silent, sorry to say that it is fully biased to the Israeli occupation military establishment, and they are marketing the Israeli stories, and they are fully supporting Israeli military actions against the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. They are not acting as journalists because they are missing objectivity, and they are fully biased, and they seem as if they are recruited for promoting the Israeli story and the Israeli narrative. We are shocked and appalled by the narrative that is presented by the Western media that is always preaching on objectivity and neutrality and impartiality. But when it comes to Palestine, they are biased, they are partial, and they are not neutral at all. So it is embedded media working in favor of the Israeli military and the Israeli occupation government. They are really appalling and shocking us all.
So, Osama, what should be done to make Israel adhere to the international law?
The state that kills and crushes the heads and the bodies of thousands of Palestinian children and women in the Gaza Strip, with full backing from the American President Joe Biden and the British Prime Minister and some other Western governments, won't abide by the international law because there is no force practiced and imposed on it to abide itself to the international law. So Israel has got the green light from the American administration and from some Western powers to do whatever it likes against the Palestinians in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. Israel is committing now genocide against the Palestinians, a crime against humanity, war crimes, without having anyone to tell it stop. And this is a violation of human morality and the human.
So, Kamel, Osama says most of the Western media is biased in the face of this conflict. What are your thoughts? How prevalent is misinformation, especially in this conflict?
The first victim in a war is the truth, and therefore that is difficult. I want to be fair to Western journalists. They're not being allowed access to Gaza. So where do they get their information? Of course, they can rely on the mainly Palestinians who are reporting from Gaza and their reporting. But also they have to stand up to the machine that Israel has that propagates lies from as soon as something happens. And again, I want to go back to Shireen Abu Akleh because that was some time ago,
yes,
where the first thing they said was, it was probably, maybe done by the Palestinians because of clashes. Completely untrue. But once they put that out, they saw doubt in the minds of people. So they become a bit worried about making a statement like Israel killed Shireen Abu Akleh because they think, well, maybe, just maybe they didn't. We know this happened with the story that was even propagated by the most famous person in the world, Joe Biden, when he said that he had seen pictures of babies
yes,
decapitated. He hadn't seen any pictures, but Netanyahu told him he had seen them. So this is how they fabricate things and then propagate them. And so there's a responsibility on everyone, not just journalists, to actually say we need to be sure that what is being sold to us is true. And of course, I don't want to see anyone die in this conflict. And I'm not saying bad things didn't happen on the 7th of October, but we need the truth,
yes,
because that is what any policy should be based on, because if they propagate these lies to demonize the Palestinian people, that is the problem.
yes.
And I am against the demonization of the fantastic, great Palestinian people.
All right, Kamel and Osama, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. I appreciate it a lot.